While this may not be true of the Greeks and the Romans per se, there were many pagan traditions throughout the ancient world that never wrote down their mythology. To modern people, and certainly Christians, this seems like barbaric and backwards. These people must be stupid for not writing down their traditions and their mythology. The truth of the matter is, though, is there's a particular reason for this. Pagans in the ancient world believed their mythology, their belief system, their traditions to be living traditions. That is, that they evolve over time. Therefore, writing them down would actually stifle that growth. To write down the traditions would actually stifle one of their greatest strengths. Over time, though, as Christianity and Abrahamism had sort of taken over much of the globe, a lot of these traditions began to get lost. In the case of the Norse, there was a Icelandic Christian monk that actually decided to write down the Norse myths so that we could have them and they wouldn't be lost to time. His name is Snorri Sturluson, worth looking into. And you might be asking, why would a Christian monk be interested in preserving the Norse myths? It's because he saw the Christians of his day losing their ability to read and understand mythology and to grasp deeper meanings within them. Something that he thought the pagans of the past had no issue with. If we look at the Celts, it can be really, really confusing because nobody in a similar way came across and really wrote down a lot of solid material. Thankfully for us modern people, a lot of the Greek and Roman material was written down, and we can now enjoy it and understand more about the way that people thought and the mythology of people during that era. One pagan tradition, though, does continue to exist in the modern world, completely unbroken, and that tradition is Hinduism. If the idea that you're presenting forth here, which is that these mythologies are kind of set in stone, then we should see something like Hinduism being exactly the way that it was thousands of years ago. This just isn't the case, though. Many modern Hindu traditions will look at religious figures from other traditions, such as the Buddha or Jesus Christ, and see them as incarnations of Hindu deities. As the world changes, their faith changes. Also, hence why, as opposed to Christianity, when new scientific findings arise, there's no real conflict. The spirituality is able to evolve as we grow as a species and involved in our understanding of this reality. We could actually similarly see in the Norse that the god Odin was actually not the original Sky Father. The earliest pantheons within the Norse tradition actually had Tyr as the father of all the gods. Odin was a much later addition, actually coming from the area of Turkey. There were cults that worshipped him there, and he came to usurp and take over the role of Sky Father within the Norse pantheon. The reason being for this is that Tyr, being a god of justice and war, a very black and white sort of god, simply didn't well fit the complexity of the world that the Norse inhabited once they had evolved over time. Odin was a much more complex god. Honestly, a rather confusing one at points. Instead of simply being a war god, of which he was also a psychopomp, meaning that he was related to the dead and ferrying souls to the afterlife. He was a world traveler, interested in art and communication and poetry and music, whereas Tyr was mostly concerned with martial aspects, the martial arts, this sort of stuff. Odin, while also interested in these things, was by and large in pursuit of knowledge above all, which is reflective of a much more evolved, civilized man in what their values would be. In the same way, we should be able to look at these ancient myths and be able to adapt them somewhat to our modern world in order that we might get some sort of value from reading them. One could argue that even though Abrahamism, Christianity, Judaism, etc. seem to be by-the-book religions that are set in stone, we can objectively observe that these traditions are not exactly the same as they've been throughout time. Even they have evolved inevitably as we evolve. This type of belief system, for me, makes these myths unusable to the modern man. It turns these stories into old, rusted tools sitting in a museum, rather than a tool that we could take out into the world and use for its proper function. I personally believe that many of these stories still have immense power to modern man. Therefore, should not be collecting dust in the kind of museum of the human psyche and believed to be unevolving, unchanging, and should be seen as exactly the way it was or is understood to be thousands of years ago. Keep rising, everybody.